Aaron Mitchell discovers that his sister Emily's fiancé, David Cross, is a corrupt and manipulative man. Using his cybersecurity skills and a fake investor identity, Aaron gathers evidence of David's crimes and leaks it, destroying David's career and reputation. Though tempted to kill him, Aaron instead chooses to expose him publicly. David is left disgraced and powerless, while Aaron restores Emily's safety without losing his own humanity. Before starting the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to like and share the video. So let's move on to our story. The sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, glinting off the gloss towers as if they were watching the city breathe. Inside a high-rise apartment, Aaron Mitchell paced the living room floor, his jaw tight, fists clenched. He had just uncovered a truth that burned through him like acid. His younger sister, Emily, the one he had raised like his own child after their parents' death, was engaged to David Cross, a man Aaron now knew was far from who he pretended to be. David had built the image of a polished Wall Street investor, expensive suits, dazzling smile, and a silver tongue that charmed everyone at first glance. But Aaron's instincts had screamed with unease since the very beginning. Tonight, those instincts had been justified. Through quiet digging, Aaron had discovered David's double life: constant infidelity, falsified credentials, debts hidden beneath a mountain of forged accounts, and women he'd manipulated and abandoned across state lines. This wasn't a man who loved Emily. This was a predator. When Aaron confronted his sister, Emily's face had gone pale, then red with disbelief. "No, you're wrong. He loves me," she whispered, trembling. But as Aaron handed her the stack of evidence, bank records, text transcripts, photos, her defense faltered. The wedding, set for 3 weeks away with hundreds invited, unraveled in a single stormy night of accusations. Emily's tears fell like glass shattering across the hardwood floor. David, when confronted, didn't dag or deny. He sneered. He told Aaron he had no right to interfere, that women like Emily are easy to replace. Something inside Aaron snapped at that moment. He stopped the wedding. The engagement collapsed. The sparkle that once lit Emily's eyes dimmed to ashes of heartbreak. To outsiders, it looked nothing more than a called-off wedding, but to Aaron, this wasn't over. David Cross had destroyed lives before, and he walked away smirking every time. Aaron couldn't allow that again. Not for his sister, and not for anyone else. If the law couldn't touch someone like David, then Aaron would find another way. For the first time in his life, Aaron felt the cold sharpness of revenge curling inside him. And revenge, he decided, would be patient. It would be meticulous. It would destroy David in the one way men like him never recover: by stripping away the mask and making the world see the rot underneath. The war had begun. The nights in New York had always been noisy, but to Aaron Mitchell, the chaos outside his apartment now felt muted against the storm inside him. He sat at his desk, the evidence of David's lies spread out like pieces of a puzzle. What he needed wasn't just anger, it was a plan. Aaron knew one thing clearly: men like David thrive in shadows. They rely on charm, secrecy, and the ignorance of others. So the first step in Aaron's war was simple: drag David out of those shadows and into the light. But he couldn't be careless. David was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He had connections in finance, law, and politics. If Aaron rushed, it would look like a vendetta. And David could spin the narrative against Emily, painting her as unstable, jealous, even delusional. Aaron wouldn't let Emily's pain be weaponized against her. No, this needed to be clean, ruthless, precise. By day, Aaron worked as a cybersecurity analyst for a private firm. He had access to tools and resources others couldn't dream of. Once, he had used those skills to protect banks from fraud. Now, he bent those same skills toward David. One by one, Aaron began to crack into the layers of David's life. Shadow accounts hidden in offshore banks, illegal investments tied to shell companies in Vegas and Miami, messaging apps filled with flirty exchanges and explicit images sent to countless women, some barely out of college. The more he uncovered, the darker the picture grew. But Aaron didn't dump this all at once. Revenge was not about speed. It was about timing. 2 weeks after the broken engagement, David had already been spotted at clubs with women hanging on his arm, smiling like a man untouched by consequence. The world still believed in his polished suit and tie persona. That's when Aaron made his first move. Quiet, almost invisible, but sharp enough to cut. He created an anonymous leak, selective information sent to a financial journalist notorious for exposing Wall Street corruption. Not everything, not yet. Just one account. A small offshore fund tied back to David under a fake name. Enough to raise questions. Enough to plant doubt. The article came out a week later. Suspicious accounts. Cracks in the Cross Empire. It wasn't a full takedown. It was a whisper, a seed of suspicion whispered into the ears of investors, clients, and partners. Aaron watched from the shadows as the first cracks appeared in David's carefully polished image. David's phone began to ring more often. Conference calls grew tense. He started snapping at assistants, drinking more heavily at parties. From the outside, he was still functioning, but Aaron knew paranoia had entered the man's bloodstream. And paranoia was only the beginning. Aaron stood at Emily's doorway late one evening. She was curled on the couch, her eyes distant, carrying the weight of betrayal that no one deserved. She looked up at him and whispered, "Why do guys like him get away with everything?" Aaron knelt beside her. His voice was low, steady, like carved stone. They don't. Not anymore. Behind his calm tone was a promise, a silent oath. Aaron wasn't just going to stop David, he was going to erase him. This was the first strike. The next would be far sharper. David Cross had always believed he was untouchable. That belief was the very weakness Aaron planned to exploit. Men who felt untouchable were blind to the edges of their own destruction. Aaron knew David's patterns. Late-night parties downtown, expensive restaurants where he flaunted his wealth, and a constant hunger for validation from rich investors and glamorous women. David's ego wasn't just oversized, it was his guiding compass, and every compass could be twisted. Aaron started by carefully constructing a fake identity. Using his cybersecurity expertise, he created a digital persona. Jonathan Reed, a wealthy but elusive Silicon Valley investor, the kind of man someone like David would salivate to befriend. Jonathan Reed had everything David wanted to see: a spotless online reputation, vague articles about startups he had supposedly funded, and carefully planted mentions on financial blogs. To any outsider, Reed was a rising name in the investment world. But to Aaron, Reed was a mask. With Reed's identity polished, Aaron set the bait. He reached out through Wall Street connections, letting whispers of Reed's new investment opportunities wind their way to David's circles. It didn't take long. Within 2 weeks, David was chasing the name Jonathan Reed, eager to impress, desperate to connect. The meeting was arranged at a private club in downtown Manhattan, one of those dimly lit, velvet-lined places where wealth and greed always mingled like smoke. Aaron arrived hidden behind tailored suits, contact lenses, and a carefully deepened voice. Nobody would connect him to Emily's older brother tonight. David entered confident and smiling, extending his hand. "Jonathan Reed, I've heard so much about you." Aaron, Jonathan, returned the smile. "And I about you, Mr. Cross, a man who turns every opportunity into gold." For the next hour, Aaron let David speak.
He flattered him where needed, nodded at his boastful stories, dangled vague hints at exclusive tech investments happening out west. And in every word David spoke, Aaron collected more ammunition. David bragged about deals he was hiding, hinted at manipulation of investment accounts, and revealed just how reckless his empire had truly become. He didn't realize the man across the table wasn't a partner. He was his executioner. By the time the meeting ended, David was hooked. He wanted Reed's money. He wanted a seat at the imaginary table Reed dangled before him. More than that, he wanted Reed's validation, the praise of another wealthy player who seemed to admire him. As David left the club, grinning and drunk on his ego, Aaron's heart beat steady. The trap had sprung. He hadn't destroyed David yet, but he had him on the hook, pulling him closer to the edge step by step. Soon, David wouldn't just be losing his money or influence. He'd be dismantling his own life with his own arrogance.
That night, Aaron stood by his apartment window, the city lights flickering below. For the first time since Emily's heartbreak, he allowed himself a small smile. The game had shifted. He wasn't just shadowing David anymore. Now he was inside David's circle, poisoning his root system, one lie at a time. And when he pulled the final thread, the mask would rip clean off. The fall wouldn't just be hard, it would be spectacular. David Cross had built his fortune on smoke and mirrors. For years, he convinced investors to pour millions into ventures that barely existed. His charm sold the illusion, and as long as money flowed, nobody questioned him too deeply. But with Aaron, disguised as Jonathan Reed, everything David thought was secure was about to unravel. A week after their first meeting, Aaron fed David another taste. Over drinks in Midtown, Aaron, still masked as Reed, casually mentioned doubts he had heard swirling about David's solvency. It was subtle, slipped in between laughter and expensive whiskey. The effect was immediate. David's smile faltered. Doubts? From who? He demanded, agitation slipping through his confident tone. Aaron shrugged smoothly. Nothing concrete. You know how the market works. Rumors spread fast. Best to stay ahead of them. By planting just a hint of suspicion, Aaron ensured David would spend the next week scrambling to reaffirm his reputation, making calls, checking with investors, chasing whispers that didn't exist. And in that desperate hustle, David made mistakes. He bragged too much, shared too much, made promises he couldn't possibly fulfill. Aaron documented everything. A month later, the second article dropped. This one was sharper, more pointed. Cross investments under SEC review for irregularities. Aaron had orchestrated it perfectly, leaking documents David himself had revealed during their partnership talks. It wasn't enough to convict him, not yet, but it was enough to rattle Wall Street. Clients began calling with concern. Partners grew skittish. A few smaller investors quietly pulled their money, not willing to risk association. For the first time in years, David felt the ground trembling beneath his feet. And Aaron was just getting started. Meanwhile, Emily had begun to rebuild her life. Therapy sessions, yoga classes, even a new job offer at an interior design firm in Brooklyn. Yet she still carried the shadow of betrayal. One evening, she caught her brother studying documents late into the night. "You're not done with him, are you?" she asked softly, her voice a mixture of fear and curiosity. Aaron didn't look up from the glow of his laptop. "Not until he feels what you felt, and worse." Emily stared at him for a long moment. Then, in the quietest whisper, she said, "I just want him gone, Aaron. I don't want him to ruin another life." Aaron finally met her eyes. "He won't. I promise." But what he didn't say was that destroying David wasn't just about protecting Emily anymore. It had become something else for Aaron, a mission, perhaps even an obsession. By winter, David had grown restless. His temper increased.
Nights at the club turned into drunken outbursts. He accused partners of betrayal, threatened employees, and fired his assistant in a fit of rage. Aaron watched it all unfold, unseen. Every move David made under pressure was exactly what Aaron wanted. Public cracks in his perfect mask. Now Aaron didn't have to pull David down. David was doing it himself. All Aaron needed was one more push. The empire was wobbling, the facade breaking. Soon, the collapse would begin, and Aaron was ready to strike harder than ever. By January, New York was blanketed in icy wind and sleet, but the chill David Cross felt had nothing to do with the weather. For the first time in years, he was short on both confidence and cash flow. His investments, once bolstered by overconfidence and glittering connections, now looked uneven, riddled with holes, and the market smelled weakness. All it took was one domino for the whole line to topple. Aaron was going to make sure of it. Aaron understood one truth about powerful men. They weren't destroyed by enemies, but by their own people. Allies turned traitors when pressure mounted. Greed always outlasted loyalty. Through his fabricated identity as Jonathan Reed, Aaron quietly approached one of David's closest lieutenants, Marcus Kane, a financial strategist who'd worked with David for nearly a decade. Marcus was brilliant, but he was underpaid, unappreciated, and treated like a servant.
All Aaron had to do was give Marcus an alternative. Over a discreet dinner, he leaned across the table. Marcus, men like you build everything. Men like David just take credit. Marcus didn't respond at first, but Aaron saw it in his eyes, the flicker of resentment long buried under fake smiles. Over the next few weeks, Aaron nurtured that resentment, offering Marcus a new venture under the Jonathan Reed brand. More power, more money, more recognition. Eventually, Marcus cracked, and when he did, Aaron gained access to insider documents, confidential contracts, and backdoor ledgers. David's empire now lay bare before him. The betrayal from within had begun. It started with sudden withdrawals. Investors quietly moved their money after whispers, carefully planted by Aaron, suggested David's accounts were under deeper regulatory probe. Within weeks, 2 major partnerships collapsed. A Chicago firm pulled millions overnight. A European investor froze additional cash flow. This wasn't coincidence. Aaron had orchestrated it all. David raged in closed-door meetings, screaming that the rumors were lies, that Cross Investments was stronger than ever. But shareholders weren't convinced. They'd seen too many promising kings crumble overnight. And the cracks widened. One evening, Emily walked into Aaron's study and paused. His desk was cluttered with files, coded emails, falsified identities, and a burner phone still glowing with Marcus Kane's texts. Her brow furrowed. "Aaron, you're the one behind all this, aren't you?" Aaron froze. He'd hidden it for months, but Emily's eyes were sharper than he'd given her credit for. When he finally nodded, she sank onto the nearest chair. "You're destroying him, piece by piece." Her tone wasn't anger. It was something more complicated, a cocktail of admiration and unease. "I told you I wouldn't let him hurt anyone else," Aaron said, voice steady as steel. Emily whispered, almost afraid of her own admission. "You sound like him." The words lingered long after she left the room. Aaron shook them off, but deep inside, part of him wondered if Emily was right. Was he different from David? Or was this just another version of control masked by righteousness? Meanwhile, David's paranoia edged into madness. He started drinking heavily at board meetings, snapping at journalists, and accusing even loyal friends of betrayal. The press smelled blood. Headlines shifted from minor suspicions to open speculation. Cross Investments on the brink? In an act of desperation, David hosted a gala, inviting New York's elite, determined to prove he was untouchable. But halfway through his grand speech about strength and vision, his phone buzzed.
On the large projector screen behind him, hacked by Aaron's careful planning, a stream of internal ledgers flashed for all to see. Offshore accounts, shell companies, fraudulent numbers. Gasps filled the ballroom. Investors stormed out. Cameras caught every second. David Cross's empire didn't just suffer cracks that night. It began to collapse. And in the shadows, Aaron watched, unseen, heart-pounding with grim satisfaction. His trap was working, but the fall was far from over. Because now David wasn't just losing money, he was losing everything. David Cross had always thrived in boardrooms, on magazine covers, and under the glow of stage lights. His empire wasn't built just on numbers, it was built on image. Now, that image was in flames. After the disastrous gala, the headlines spread like wildfire. Cross investments exposed, insider fraud allegations abound. Wall Street's golden boy or master manipulator? David Cross silent as SEC opens formal inquiry. Morning news shows replayed the clip of his ledgers flashing across the ballroom screen again and again. Former allies were interviewed on camera, each one carefully distancing themselves. Investors pulled funding in droves, and rumors of bankruptcy swept through Manhattan. The proud, untouchable David Cross was now a spectacle, hounded by paparazzi, mocked on late-night TV, and shredded in business columns that once praised him. From his apartment window, Aaron watched the storm unfold with a cold, steady calm. The world was finally seeing David without the mask, but revenge wasn't done yet. David's life became a spiral of rage and paranoia. Once surrounded by admirers, he now found himself abandoned. His penthouse, once filled with parties, sat silent. Bottles and shattered glasses littered the floors, and blackout curtains smothered the Manhattan skyline he once called his kingdom. He fired lawyers, hired new ones, and fired them again. No one could fix what had been broken. But paranoia had turned him dangerous. He began to suspect hidden enemies, whispering shadows that lurked behind every setback. And when he looked hard enough, he began to notice one: Aaron Mitchell. He remembered Aaron from Emily's broken engagement, the quiet, protective brother who had stood like stone when exposed. Something gnawed at David. Could Aaron be behind this? The thought alone fanned his rage into fire. One night, David showed up at Emily's Brooklyn apartment, unannounced and drunk. He pounded the door until Emily froze in terror. When Aaron opened it, David's once polished figure stood disheveled, eyes red-eyed, and his voice a venomous hiss. "You think you won, Mitchell? You think you can ruin me?" Aaron didn't flinch. He held his ground, his tone measured. "Leave before I make this worse for you." David grinned, a smile twisted by desperation. "Worse? I am the worst, and I'll ruin her, your sweet little Emily, before I let you ruin me."
That was the line that sealed his fate. Aaron stepped forward, his eyes as cold as the January wind outside. "Touch her, and I'll bury you, deeper than you can imagine." The two men stared each other down, predator versus predator. One desperate, clinging to a crumbling empire. The other calm, calculating, already holding the dagger at his throat. Emily's trembling voice finally broke the silence. "David, leave, now." David staggered back, sneering, but for the first time Aaron saw something burning beneath the arrogance: fear. That night, after David finally disappeared into the city, Emily clutched Aaron's arm. "This isn't just business anymore. He's dangerous. He'll come after us." Aaron nodded. He had already made the decision. Exposing David wasn't enough. Money, reputation, those were temporary. David had crossed a new line, threatening Emily in her own home. Now it was going to end, permanently. The fall from grace had stripped David's wealth and his reputation. The next stage would strip away the last thing he clung to: control. And Aaron was ready to play the final, most dangerous game. David Cross had lost his empire, his investors, his reputation. But a man like David didn't go quietly.
Stripped of the mask, he lashed out like a wounded animal, reckless, violent, and far more dangerous than when he'd ruled Wall Street. Reports started surfacing around Manhattan's nightlife. David getting into bar fights, screaming at strangers, threatening anyone who so much as looked at him the wrong way. A former business associate even filed a police report claiming David had shown up at his townhouse brandishing a gun. But money still buys silence, even in decay. Charges were dropped, records buried. To the public, he was just another fallen tycoon drunk on his own collapse. But Aaron knew better. David wasn't just unraveling, he was hunting. One night, Aaron found a message slipped under Emily's apartment door, a simple piece of paper with 4 words scrawled in sharp black ink. You can't protect her. Aaron's blood went cold. Emily gasped when she read it, her hands trembling. She turned to her brother, whispering like a child who sensed a monster under her bed. He's watching us. Aaron folded the paper carefully, his face calm, though fire raged in his chest. Let him watch, he said quietly. It only makes him easier to catch. But inside, he knew this was no longer about financial ruin or reputation. David had slipped into the abyss, and now his vengeance was personal. If David wanted to stalk in the shadows, then Aaron would build a cage around him. Using every tool at his disposal, surveillance software, GPS trackers, quiet favors from law enforcement friends, Aaron turned David's world into a map of movements. Nightclubs, abandoned offices, late-night drives to shady motels in Queens. David had become a ghost haunting all the wrong corners of New York, and Aaron followed silently, recording each reckless move. But David wasn't stupid. Desperate men rarely were. One night, in Hell's Kitchen, Aaron realized just how far David was willing to go. Aaron left a bar after tailing David's erratic steps for hours. The bitter February wind whipped through the streets, stinging his eyes. He turned into a narrow alley and froze. David stood there waiting. No Armani suit, no polished smile, just a man ruined, coat hood pulled low, eyes burning. And in his shaking hand, a gun. Took you long enough, David sneered, stepping closer. I knew it was you. All of this, the leaks, the lies. You ruined me, Mitchell. Aaron's pulse pounded, but his voice was steady. No, David, you ruined yourself. All I did was show the world what you really are. David raised the gun, his hand trembling between rage and blurred intoxication. I should have finished this when I had the chance. Your sister first, then you. At that moment, Aaron understood 2 things. 1, David was lost, swallowed whole by his need for control. And 2, this was no longer about revenge, it was survival. Aaron took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving David's. If you pull that trigger, you'll never walk out of this alley alive. For a split second, something flickered across David's face. Doubt. Fear. Then his arrogance surged back, teeth bared in a crooked grin. You don't have the guts. Aaron's hand tightened around the small stun weapon he'd hidden in his jacket hours earlier, always prepared for this inevitable moment. The alley became a standstill, the predator and the avenger. One shaking with desperation, the other calm and silent, like a blade waiting to strike.
The world outside the alley carried on. Cabs honking, neon lights pulsing, strangers laughing in distant streets. But inside the narrow passageway, only 2 men existed. One shaking with the weight of desperation, the other hardened by months of vengeance. David's hand gripped the gun so tightly his knuckles glowed white. His breath came in jagged bursts, each exhale fogging against the frigid night. Aaron stood still,
the stun weapon hidden in his coat, every muscle coiled like steel wire. David's voice cracked as he barked, "On your knees. Let's see how tough you are without your little tricks." Aaron didn't move. His voice was quiet, perfectly calm. "You're not in control anymore, David. You've already lost." The words hit like gasoline thrown on fire. Snarling, David lunged forward, the gun's barrel pressing against Aaron's chest. For a second, the alley seemed to freeze. One twitch of a finger, and it was over. But that second was all Aaron needed. His hand shot out, twisting David's wrist with brutal precision. The gun clattered to the ground, skidding across the pavement. In the same motion, Aaron drove the stun weapon into David's side. The crackle of electricity erupted, and David screamed, his body convulsing violently before collapsing against the brick wall. David crumpled, gasping like a drowning man, but rage still simmered in his glare. You think this makes you better than me?" he spat, coughing. "You're no different. You want control just like I do." Aaron crouched low, gripping David's collar and forcing him to meet his eyes. His voice was low, dangerous. "I don't want control. I want you ended. Your lies, your poison, your empire, gone. You'll never hurt Emily or anyone else again." David wheezed laughter, even through pain. "You'll never erase me. Guys like me always crawl back. Another city, another name, someone new to destroy. You'll never stop it." Aaron's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of the blade edge within himself, the whisper that if he wanted to guarantee peace for Emily, there was only one final solution: make sure David could never crawl back. Aaron looked down at the man sprawled before him. David wasn't polished anymore. He wasn't the charming face of Wall Street or the ruthless tycoon towering above everyone else. He was broken, filthy, drunken, pathetic. But even stripped bare, he was still dangerous. His threats weren't empty. If left alive, David would find a way to crawl out of the wreckage. Aaron's hand hovered over the gun on the ground. One pull of the trigger. That was all it would take. The air in the alley grew suffocating with the silence of that choice. In his mind, Aaron heard Emily's voice. "I just want him gone, Aaron. I don't want him to ruin another life." Gone. What did gone mean? Exposed? Ruined financially? Or gone forever? Aaron's fingers brushed the cold steel of the gun. David, lying half-conscious against the wall, looked up one last time and whispered, hoarse but still venomous, "You don't have the guts."
Aaron's breath slowed. His body was steady. His heart was a metronome of ice. And in that moment, he understood something terrible. Revenge had brought him here, but justice demanded a choice that would haunt him forever. Would he kill David Cross and end the threat once and for all? Or would he spare him, trusting that the ruins of his empire were punishment enough, even if it risked David rising again? Standing there in the darkness, Aaron felt the world pivot on that knife's edge, and whatever choice he made next would define not just David's fate, but his own soul. The gun on the ground gleamed under the flicker of a distant streetlight, a symbol of everything Aaron had fought for and everything he risked becoming. His hand lingered inches above it while David wheezed against the alley wall, broken but not beaten. The air was heavy. The city noise outside the alley blurred into a hum. For Aaron, time slowed to a single heartbeat repeating in his chest. Images flooded his mind. Emily crying on the floor the night the engagement shattered, her pain, her hollow stare, the innocence David had stripped away. Then the laughter at the gala as David dismissed him, the arrogance in his snarl when he threatened Emily just days ago.
Every memory screamed for vengeance. Every muscle told him to pull the trigger to silence the monster forever. It would be easy. So easy. But then he saw something else. Emily's pale face when she had whispered, "You sound like him." That was the line that tore through the haze. If he killed David now, would he be different from the man he despised? Would the brother who swore to protect become just another predator wielding power in the shadows? Aaron's jaw clenched as he wrestled with the abyss. Revenge or justice? Violence or restraint? Brother or executioner? Finally, Aaron stood, his hand pulling away from the gun. He looked down at David, who scowled up, waiting for the shot that never came. "You're not worth the bullet. Death is mercy, and I promised Emily you'd never hurt anyone again, so I'll make sure you rot instead." David's eyes widened, confusion flickering across his broken face. "You coward," he hissed. Aaron ignored him. Instead, he pulled out his phone, already live-streaming video with evidence Aaron had collected through Marcus Kane and his own surveillance. In the light of Aaron's camera, David Cross looked like what he truly was. Not a king, not a predator, but a ruined man cowering in filth. "This is what you've become," Aaron said, his voice calm but lethal. "And now, the whole world will see." Within minutes, the footage was uploaded across anonymous accounts. David sprawled in an alley, half-drunk, confessing his fraud, his arrogance, his threats. By dawn, it would go viral. It wouldn't matter if he denied it later. The image was burned forever. Aaron turned and walked out of the alley, leaving David collapsed in the shadows. He didn't even need to look back. The empire was gone, the mask was gone, and now David's dignity, the last thing he clung to, was gone too. Behind him, David's voice cracked through one last broken scream, more wounded than threatening. "I'll come back. You hear me? I'll come back." But Aaron didn't stop walking. For the first time in months, his chest felt lighter. Not joyful, not relieved, just lighter. David wasn't dead, but he was finished. And for Aaron, that was a far crueler punishment. That night when Aaron returned home, Emily was waiting. He handed her the phone with the live footage now spiraling across the internet. She watched in silence, her eyes wide with both shock and relief. When she finally looked at Aaron, tears glimmered. "It's over?" she asked. Aaron nodded. "It's over."
She exhaled, a trembling sigh years in the making. For the first time since the nightmare began, Emily began to believe in tomorrow again. And though Aaron knew no act of revenge could erase the pain David had caused, he knew one thing with certainty: David Cross would never rise again. The judgment was passed. The abyss had been stared down, and Aaron Mitchell had chosen not just victory, but his soul. Morning came heavy over New York, pale sunlight spilling through frosted windows and bouncing off icy sidewalks. But for once, Aaron Mitchell didn't feel the weight of the city pressing down on him. Instead, he felt stillness, the kind that comes only after a storm has finally broken. David Cross awoke in an emergency ward, his body trembling from alcohol and adrenaline, his mind foggy. But when he reached for his phone, his chest sank. Everywhere online, his face bloomed like wildfire, ragged, furious, screaming threats in that alley. Screenshots, clips, headlines, late-night talk show jokes. The world had already decided David Cross was finished. He wasn't just bankrupt. He wasn't just under investigation. He was humiliated, mocked, discarded. The empire he had built from arrogance had crumbled into ash, and there was no coming back. For the first time in years, David Cross wasn't feared,
he was forgotten. In Brooklyn, Emily sat by the window, coffee mug in hand, staring at the pale light over rooftops. The scars of betrayal lingered, but they didn't feel as heavy. She turned to Aaron, who leaned silently against the kitchen counter. Her voice was soft. "You really ended it, didn't you?" Aaron nodded. He didn't feel proud exactly, just resolved. "He can't hurt you anymore. Or anyone." Tears built in her eyes, but this time they weren't born of sadness. They were release, relief, gratitude. She reached across the table, clasping Aaron's hand. "You saved me, Aaron. You didn't just protect me, you gave me back my life." For Aaron, those words mattered more than any revenge, any victory. Later, sitting alone with the city buzzing faintly beyond the glass, Aaron thought of David's final words in the alley. "I'll come back." Maybe David would try. Desperate men sometimes clawed at the rubble for years, but even if he did, it wouldn't matter. His mask was destroyed. His name, his wealth, his legacy, all gone. Aaron had taken away not just his power, but his ability to ever wield it again. And in the end, that was a sharper blade than death. And more importantly, Aaron had walked away from the abyss himself. He hadn't become the monster he hunted. 3 months later, Emily began her new job in design, her laughter slowly returning to rooms where silence once dwelled. And Aaron continued his career in cybersecurity, but something inside him had shifted. He carried himself differently now, quieter, sharper, with the unshakable knowledge of what revenge costs and what justice demands. As for David Cross, he faded into obscurity, bankrupt, rejected, whispered about only as a warning of greed and corruption. His shadow lingered on street corners and in online scandals, but his empire never rose again. In a city where power was worshipped and forgotten in equal measure, David had become just another cautionary tale. And that was Aaron's victory, not through blood, but through ruin. The vow he made to his sister had been fulfilled. The cycle of pain ended not with a gunshot, but with justice. So friends, how did you like this story? Do let us know by commenting. If you want your name to be included in our story, then write your name in the comments along with the place from where you are listening to this story so that we can mention your name in the next story. To hear more such fun and scary stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it with your friends. We'll meet again in the next video.